Welcome, everybody. I am very excited to have, I'll just call you a guest, first-time guest, Rabbi Ben Chaidell to the show. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, thank you so much. It's so wonderful to be here with you, Rabbi Drew Kaplan, and with everyone at Cedar Village. It's really, really wonderful to be here. I wish I could be there in person, but this is the next best thing.
Right. So members of Adath Israel will recognize him as the assistant rabbi, and you used to, in the pre-pandemic times, you came to Cedar Village before, right?
Yeah, I would come pretty regularly,
Mhm.
once every few weeks to, mostly to see folks who are connected to Adath Israel, but I would see everyone. And I had a wonderful time doing a Hanukkah candle lighting on one of the floors. And yeah, I just love the community at Cedar Village and look forward to being with you all soon, God willing,
Yeah.
sooner rather than later.
Well, we did recently take the first step in doing that by getting the vaccination. So it's encouraging in the hopefully near future of opening up and getting past this. Getting past this.
Definitely.
Okay. So just a quick little background bio on Rabbi Chaidell here. So in addition to being the assistant rabbi at Adath Israel, he earned his rabbinical ordination from Jewish Theological Seminary in New York City, an undergraduate degree from Yale. From Yale University. What was your major?
Religious studies. Is
Religious
it?
studies. What a surprise. A religious study major becomes a rabbi. All right. So rolling on into our topic for this talk, which was God's name. Now, I want to provide a little context, which is we are in the very beginning of the second portion in the book of Exodus. And the book of Exodus in Hebrew is Shemot, which means names. And it's no accident in last week's Torah portion of Shemot, we saw a lot of names, not just at the very beginning with the tribes, and which was kind of a reminder of their original naming in the book of Genesis, as well as Moses getting named Moshe. We also have Moshe giving his son Gershom a name, and so naming is a big part of this, but of last week's Torah portion, and all really, I think, leads up to the very beginning of this week's Torah portion, when we are now going past human names and moving on to divine names, right? So we have divine name, and I'm just going to bring it up on screen. So Rabbi Chaidell here has put together this source sheet, right? Yes. So I'm just going to flip straight to it, which is here in chapter 6 of Exodus. God says to Moses and said, I am the Lord. I appear to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but I did not make myself known to them by my name, however we want to pronounce that. So God here is straight up saying to Moses at the beginning of this week's Torah portion, these guys were big guys, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were significant figures. I gave myself a particular name, but Moshe, I'm going to identify myself with an entirely different name. It doesn't even sound different. It's not even like similar. It's incredibly different. Elohim, like I am the Lord. Okay. Rabbi Chaidell, do you want to lead into what we got here in chapter 3 from last week's Torah portion?
Sure. Yeah. So I included in the sources two different revelations by God of God's name. And like Rabbi Kaplan just mentioned, the names are so important in the Torah. Names reflect who we are and our personalities. And we see this, I know many of you may have been at, the naming ceremonies or brises for your children or for your grandchildren, maybe even your great grandchildren. And whenever we give someone a name, that name represents something. That name says something important about our wishes for our loved one. It's often in the Ashkenazi tradition, we will name a baby after a loved one who has died. And We hope that the new child will carry forward the personality and the values and the legacy of the person who came before. I was just talking to a congregant at Adath Israel, where I was at her grandmother's baby naming, and her grandmother is named after my congregant's mother, right? And it represents her, the love and the care and the connection to Judaism. She wants all of that to continue in her granddaughter. And so names are so important for us. And the same thing is true for the name of God, right? The name of God represents something about God. It tells us something about who God is and how God relates to us. And that's what we'll be talking about today, is we're going to be seeing what the different names of God can tell us about our relationship with God.
Great. Do you want me to bring that up again?
Sure. Unless you have any other comments on that.
No.
Yeah.
Names are important, and certainly when it comes to the divine name, also very important.
Yeah. So the first name that God reveals to Moses is the name of Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh. So this is the verse. This is from last week's Torah portion from Exodus chapter 3. Moses says to God, "When I come to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your forefathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is God's name?' what shall I say to them?" And God said to Moses, "Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh." What is this name? Moses is asking God, when the Israelites come and I tell them, this God is going to free you from Egypt, they're going to be like, "What God? Like, what's that God's name? Who is this God?" And God tells Moses to tell the people that God's name is Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh.
Now, Rabbi Chaidell, how do you translate Asher
I was going to ask you the same thing.
I'm happy to provide an answer.
Yeah.
I will be who I will be.
Yeah.
I
think
and what's really fascinating is that it really is not a definite, like a concrete, tangible aspect. It really is existence. It is being. I will be that which I will be. Not even a particular person. It's some sort of existence. Like God is existence himself to some degree.
Yeah. Yeah, literally, as Rabbi Kaplan said, the name literally means in Hebrew, "I will be what I will be." It's strange, right? Because often the names, and we're going to see soon that the names of God refer to something concrete. They describe a way that God interacts with us. But this is so abstract. This, like, what does this mean? I will be what I will be. What is that? Right? What does it mean to us? And I agree with you, Rabbi Kaplan. I think that it conveys a sense of God being beyond all description, beyond all names. This is just God being so beyond anything that we can comprehend or describe or name, and say God is what God is, and we can't even say anything more than that.
Interesting. I really actually was going more. I was going more for just existence. It's the opposite of tangibility. Let me offer something that is in direct contradistinction. Thinking about the various gods that were in existence at the exact same time and place, and how some of them were a god of a particular thing. Maybe it could be a fertility god. Maybe it could be even just thinking about the Egyptian gods, because we're talking about Egypt here, right? That's the book of Exodus. You can't avoid talking about Egypt. They had the god of the Nile. They had Ra, which is the sun god. So they had gods of very particular tangible things. Here, God is saying, I'm not the fertility God. I'm not the God of the Nile. I'm not the God of the sun. I'm not a tree God, right? Not Asherah. I'm not a particular thing. I really far surpass all of that.
Yeah, it's almost like going back to the story of creation. God is not the sun, God is not the moon, God is not the stars. God created the sun, the moon, and the stars. God is fashioned everything and created everything.
Hmm.
And perhaps that's pointing to that.
And also, I think it's worth noting, it's if you're going to reference back to Genesis, I would also say he's not somehow hierarchically above those things, right? Heaven. He's around. He's making things happen. He exists. He's around, and he will continue to be.
Yeah, it's funny how you say that. This reminds me of a discussion that we had on Shabbat morning I had with Rabbi Smolkin, which was we spoke about how often the name of God is translated, and you can see it often in even in this translation a little later on. We'll see it's often translated as Lord.
Hmm.
Right? That's the way that we pronounce God's four-letter name is translated literally as my Lord or our Lord. But when we consider what God actually is and what God's relationship to us, God is like great and awesome and greater than us, but it's so much more than a relationship between a servant and a master or a king and his subjects, right? There's a sense of deep, intimate, personal relationship, a sense of existing and being present to us. And we're going to be talking about that soon, about how the names of God actually are quite personal, especially the name that's revealed in this week's Torah portion.
Hmm.
So maybe actually with that, maybe if you wouldn't mind, Rabbi Kaplan, scrolling down to the next source,
Sure.
we're going to see how even in this name of Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh, or I will be what I will be, we can see how God's personal relationship with the people, God's presence, and as Rabbi Kaplan said, God's existence with the people, we'll see how that comes out. So maybe we'll read. Do you want to do a little role play where I can be Moses and you can be God?
Sure. 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 Sure.
Okay. So this is the medieval commentator Rashi on the verse that we just read. All right, you want to start?
I see that God replied to him peace.
Oh, the first I will be.
Oh,
Yeah,
I am that I am.
yeah. I think that's also God speaking.
Okay. I will be with them in this sorrow. I who will be with them in the subjection that they will suffer at the hands of other kingdoms.
Whereupon Moses said, Lord of the universe, why should I mention to them other sorrows? They have enough with this sorrow.
You have spoken rightly. Thus shall you say, I am, without the addition of Asher Ehiyah, I will continue to be, which has reference to future sorrows has sent me unto you. Wow, this is so sad. All it is about being a Jew and believing in God is just one sorrow after another. It's a little quite laconic from Rashi.
Yeah. What do they say? There's the old joke that every Jewish holiday is they tried to kill us, God saved us,
Hmm.
let's eat. So we can see that come out here. Jewish history is certainly filled with a lot of enduring of suffering. But what I love about this source is that it says that we're not alone in it. Like God is always with us. And in fact, God's very name, Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh, what does that name actually mean? It's not that God will be what God will be anywhere, but rather God will be wherever we are, especially when we're suffering. God is wherever we are. That's what God's name means here.
Right. I mean, the nice
Yeah.
thing is almost, I feel like what Rashi is doing here is saying, what is the being? Who cares about the being or God just existing? That's nice. But what does that have to do with us?
Mm-hmm.
There is a relational aspect here, which Rashi is articulating as God's existence is just some sort of random abstraction, and who cares why he's mentioning it to Moses at this very moment? No, no, no. Actually, it's specifically being with the Israelites, and even not just being with them now, but even in their darkest of days, which it's nice to be. God is not a fair weather God. God isn't just with the Jews in the best of times. God's even there in the worst of times, which for Rashi, and he like deal with the Crusades, right? To some degree. So he, living in a majority Christian country, dealt with some tough times and even despite living in tough times in medieval Christian Europe, still felt a connection to God. So this is
Exactly.
I see this as more than just whatever's playing out between God and Moses here. I think what Rashi is arguing for is, even in his own medieval time, living in medieval Christian Europe, that to him and his readers, who are his audience, his contemporary medieval European Jews, and saying that even God, you might think God has forsaken us, yet God still is with us.
Yeah, exactly. You can see that exactly in his language, where he's referring to God will be with them even at the hands of other kingdoms, right? When the
Mhm.
people are wherever they are. And
Yeah.
you know, to go back to your point about relationships, like that's how we understand God as Jews, is through God's relationship with us as the Jewish people, right? Where God has relationships with other peoples too, but we understand God through God's unique relationship with us. And the way that you're describing God's relationship with the Jewish people,
Mhm.
it certainly reminds me, like, thank God, other relationships that I have in my life, and I hope some of us have as well. Relationships of parents to children, husbands to wives, and siblings and good friends, right? To be a good friend, as you said, it's not just to be with your friend when you're having a beer outside or going out for drinks, right? It's to be with them when they're having troubles too. And that's how you know who your real friends are, right? Or
Mhm.
those that stand with you even at times of tsuris, right? And that's what God is saying here, that God will be with us. Eheyeh asher eheyeh. God will be with us even in those times as well.
Mhm.
And I think that the beauty here too, what I love about this source, is that Moses is telling God, wait, I know that God, you'll be with the people through all of their tsuris, but you don't have to tell them about all their tsuris right now. Right? Take
Right.
it one step at a time. And God says, okay, you're right. So God just says, yeah, right? Which is referring to the next verse. That's how God says, just call me yeah, right? Don't worry about any of the other sufferings
Oh,
yet. And
that's a clever way of bridging that. Why is God saying to Moses, call me Eyash area, but when you tell the Israelites, I'm just simply Eya. Oh, that's
yeah,
clever. That is very
yeah, that's what I love about this midrash.
mm,
Is it's a great way to explain the verse, but it also just shows the dynamic nature of God, how God is so responsive to Moses, and that the relationship, I should say, the name of God that we learn results. It comes out of the relationship that we have with God, and Moses is able to tell God, hey, maybe you should have a different name or relate to us in a little different of a way in order to better that relationship. And that reminds me how sometimes, when I'm interacting with people, sometimes maybe I won't, if I'm with someone, if I'm interacting with a 5-year-old, I might be known by a different name than I would if I was interacting with someone who was 75. And I don't know if you ever feel this, Rabbi Kaplan, but sometimes in my life I'm Ben, sometimes I'm Rabbi Ben, sometimes I'm Rabbi Chaidell, it depends. We're often known, Mr. Kaplan or Mr., we're often called by different names based on the different relationships that we have and how we interact with other people. And I think that's what God does here as well, because God is responsive to the needs of Moses and the needs of the Jewish people.
mhm.
Yeah, so we're going to see now another source that has to do with God's relationship with the Jewish people, and we're going to learn about the second name of God that we're talking about today. The first one was Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh. This one is the 4-letter name of God, which is very mystical, and there's a lot you can say about it. I don't know, Rabbi Kaplan, do you have any words of wisdom about this 4-letter name of God that I see maybe you're pointing to on the cursor? What
Oh,
what what
that wasn't
what are these
intentional.
letters and what do they represent?
So it was not intentional. I'll say something anyways, which is it's fascinating the way you describe it as mystical. I don't see it at all that way. I really see it as almost an abbreviation of what God says to Moses in that third chapter of Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, that that if you even look at the root here, it's basically being. So the shorish really here is the same root as being, and it comes across to me as an abbreviation of Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. So it's really it's a shorthand, it's a nickname. I guess one could read it many different ways. I don't even think about mysticism, so I'm fascinated that you bring that into play here.
Yeah, yeah. I think when I use the word mysticism, I use it to refer to something that is beyond our comprehension, something that is way beyond us. And I know that God is certainly that, and I think God's name represents that. There's been for the rabbis, the name of God has tremendous power. There's stories in the Talmud, as I'm sure you know, about the rabbis using the name of God and saying it to cause crazy feats and grow thousands of cucumbers in the fields and do all these like random acts of magic. And so there's a sort of spiritual power, even a physical power associated with this name. But in this story, right, as we're going to learn, the name of God is very personal. It's very much the way that we know God, the way that we're in relationship with God. And some scholars have suggested that this name, written with these 4 letters, is actually like the personal name of God, right? Like that's really God's name. And all the other names are like descriptions of God. And we're going to see here how the name of God came to be associated with one aspect of God in particular, which is the aspect of love, the aspect of mercy, of chesed, of rachamim. Right? Rachamim comes from the root rechem, which means a womb. It's the compassion and the love that a mother feels for her child. That's the aspect, the personal aspect of God that comes out through this name, that we experience when we're in a relationship with God, when we call God by this name.
Do you want to take it away?
Sure. So let's look at this
can we do
source.
6.2 and 6.3 together? Is that
Uh,
possible?
sure. Yeah. I think they're pretty similar. I think 6.2 is, yeah, maybe we can look at 6.2 and then we'll do 6.3. Or you want to do 6.3 first and then
Or
go back?
you really want to do the Exodus Rabbah, then 6.2 and Exodus Rabbah together?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking.
Let's
Yeah.
do it.
Okay, let's do it. Rabbi Kaplan, would you like to read?
Sure. God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am the Lord. Although that's the translation.
The translation, yeah.
That's the translation, Lord. What it actually means, or we could go with my abbreviation of Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, that I exist. I'm sort of the Lord of existence.
I love that. I love that. Let's do that. I love that.
Oh, you want me to continue?
Sure.
All right, Exodus Rabbah. So this is a midrash. This is a rabbinic narrative expansion here. So Moses did not keep this matter to himself. Rather, he came to challenge the decree of the Holy One, blessed be he, and he began to say, Lord, why did you bring evil upon this people?
I'm going to just interrupt you for a second and to give some context here. This is as Rabbi Kaplan said, the rabbinic commentary on the story in Exodus. And they're actually bringing up a verse from the previous Torah portion, which is when Moses and Aaron first go to Pharaoh, things don't go so well, right? The Pharaoh says, what do you mean you want to leave Egypt? You must not be working hard enough. You have to make bricks, but I'm not going to give you any straw. And the people are suffering, and the people are probably being like beaten by the Egyptian taskmasters, and they complain to Moses, and Moses goes to God and says, God, why are you making things worse? You're making things worse for the people. And Moses here, according to the Midrash, has this special insight into God's plan, and Moses knows that God is going to draw this out, and God's going to tell Pharaoh, God's going to harden Pharaoh's heart and make the people have to wait to leave. And Moses thinks this is not fair. Like, the people have been through enough. As he said earlier, they've been through enough. Moses has such love and compassion for the people, even to this extent that he's going to challenge God and say, God, why are you making the people suffer even more, right? So that's the context here. That is what Moses is telling God here. And now we're going to see, how does God respond to Moses' challenge?
And on this matter, the aspect of justice sought to strike Moses, as it is written, and Elohim, or God, spoke to Moses. But since the Holy One, blessed be he, noticed that it was for the sake of Israel's suffering that Moses spoke in such a fashion, God reverted to interact with Moses according to the aspect of mercy, as it is written, and God spoke to him, I am the Lord.
Hey, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So to understand, thank you so much for that impassioned reading. To understand this source, we need to understand how the rabbis in the Midrash view their relationship with God. And there are two ways by which they experienced God. One, it was through justice, and one was through mercy. We may be familiar about this on Yom Kippur. We pray, God, Avinu Malkeinu, Chonenu Va'anenu, bring out your mercy and your compassion on us, because of course we know that it's a day of judgment. So there's God's judgment on one side. There's the sense that God is going to reward the righteous and punish the wrongdoers. There's the side of justice, but then there's the side of mercy, the side of compassion, the side of rachamim, right? And God interacts with us in two different ways. Sometimes through justice, sometimes through mercy.
Right. The rabbis in the Midrash and their narrative expansion world kept those balanced. The strict justice versus mercy, and that they were kind of in a balance. We definitely see that at the very beginning of Genesis, of when God says, let us make man, and who's the us? Who's the we? God, I thought you were a singular. And the rabbis there say, well, actually, there were four different aspects that came to mind: truth, peace, and then we also have these other ones. And they were sort of at loggerheads until God does something about it. So it's an interesting abstraction, right? This midah, this aspect of judgment and this aspect of mercy. It's a fascinating abstraction.
Yeah, that balance is so important. When you think about our lives, if you're interacting with your children or with your friends, and you're all about justice, right? And let's say your food comes, let's say to deliver your food 2 minutes late, and you're like, my food is 2 minutes late, right? That you may not be the most pleasant person to be around. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, if you're all about mercy and kindness and love, you might get taken advantage of. You may not stand up for yourself. If someone, let's say your food comes 3 hours late, and you say, oh, thank you so much for bringing it, you should probably tell someone that you need your food on time. So mm-hmm. I think there's a balance in how we interact with one another, and that balance is learned through the way that God interacts with us. Mm-hmm. And we're going to see, maybe we'll see in the source how, thank you, we'll see how in this source, God is feeling insulted by Moses, right? God perhaps is indignant and angry, and God needs to stand up for God's self, and the aspect of justice comes out. God wants to strike Moses and punish him for saying what he said. But the Holy Blessed One notices that Moses was saying all that he said only because he had compassion for the people, for the sake of Israel's suffering. Because God notices Moses' compassion, God reverts to interact with Moses through compassion. And the aspect of rachamim, the aspect of mercy, comes out.
Right. It's not selfish. He's standing up as an advocate.
Exactly. This may remind you of what Abraham did for the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Standing up to God for the sake of compassion and justice. And here, this is what Moses does. And I just think the power here, if we're going back to thinking, if our topic for today is the name of God, you have two different names, two different attributes of God, the aspect of justice, the aspect of mercy. And Moses' behavior determines which aspect of God will be experienced. Right? The more merciful and compassionate we are for each other, the more compassionate God will be for us. And that's something you may be familiar with on Yom Kippur, right? The more that we forgive and care for others, the more that God will forgive and care for us. The classic teaching that God will only forgive us if we forgive our fellow, or the other way around, God will only forgive us if we apologize to our fellow for what we did. Right? We need to behave with compassion and love for one another to experience that from God, to bring out God's name of compassion, of El Chanun Verachum, the God of compassion and love. In order to experience that, we need to show that to one another as well.
And speaking of names, so that second verse in the 6th chapter, which is at the top of this week's Torah portion, is immediately then followed by this.
Yeah. So this is God. Yeah.
You know what? I'll just continue reading.
Sure.
So I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but I did not make myself known to them by my name, this tetragrammaton, this 4-lettered word. So really, it's hard to ignore this verse. It's just like with flashing lights is just so deeply fascinating, of saying, yes, Moses, I'm giving you my name, but don't worry, I have a connection to your ancestors, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, in which I actually had a different name, although, and I know this is where Rabbi Chaidell wants to go, I didn't only just have a different name as just some sort of piece of factual information, but also as a sense of a different relationship. And Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they're the forefathers. Yet I'm going to have a different relationship with you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that sense that God interacts differently with each of us based on who we are. There's a beautiful verse in the book of Numbers where Moses calls upon God, and another name of God is Elokei Ruchot L'chol Basar. That God is the God of the spirits, of the wind, literally, the spirits, the souls, you could say, of all living things. That God knows, I think Rashi actually says that this means that God understands the spirit of each and every person, and God has a unique relationship with each of us because each of us are unique. And as we've seen, God's relationship, the name of God changes based on God's relationship in different circumstances, whether it's with Moses and how Moses is acting, whether it's with Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, revealing God's self in different ways. And that's where our next source comes in. It's describing, this is sort of zooming out a little bit and looking overall at the different names of God. This is from a wonderful Torah commentary called a Torah Commentary for Our Times by Rabbi Harvey J. Fields. And he summarizes a lot of different scholars and their views on the Torah portions. So this text by Rabbi Fields is going to offer us some insight into what all these different names of God mean. So maybe, I guess I can keep reading if you want, and then if you just scroll up a little bit, there we go. So the modern commentator Nahum Sarna explains that names for God in the Torah reveal the character, and nature, the makeup of the whole personality of God. Each name provides another valuable insight into how biblical Jews thought about God. Sarna's view is similar to the one advanced by Rabbi Abba Hillel Silver. He was a leading Reform rabbi in the early 20th century. Silver says that it was a common practice among ancient peoples to change the names of their deity or to add an additional one to indicate that the deity had assumed a new or an additional role. Since God was about to liberate the Israelites from Egyptian bondage, a new name, the Tetragrammaton, the four-letter name of God, was announced to Moses. The new name, Silver speculates, means accomplisher, or the God who performs what is promised. God's new name would not only inspire confidence and hope in the hearts of the enslaved Israelites, but would be a reminder to all Jews after their liberation that God had freed them from oppression. God's name foreshadowed what God was about to do.
Cool. Did you want to read this next one or avoid it?
Sure. I can read it, or if you want. We wanted to conclude with a provocative statement, just to kind of lead into it. You know, we saw from Rabbi Fields how the different names of God represent the divine personality, the different ways that God relates to us. And we could consider perhaps that the ways that God relates to us are also ways that we can strive to live, right? God is our creator. The Torah says that we're all children of God. We're made in the image of God, and we look to God for guidance on how to live our lives. So perhaps the name of God, the qualities of God, the ways that God interacts with us, perhaps all of that represents an ideal towards which we can strive. And that, I think, is what this philosopher Hugo Bergman writes in this final source here. Is a very provocative statement. I'm not sure I totally agree, but we can discuss it. Hugo Bergman writes that ehyeh is an imperfect tense, which means I will be. And this teaches that God is the yet to be perfected I. I will be, the yet to be perfected I, the I that is yet to be. Rabbi Kaplan, do you have any thoughts on this?
I definitely disagree. Here's why. I mean, first of all, the imperfectness is about the tense, not necessarily is about almost more of the verb than the subject. So I think it's it's creative. I just don't think it matches up at all. Just because we're talking about the way we describe the tense in English, I don't know how other languages describe it. I don't think it's necessarily about perfection. I see it more as God says I am. I am who I will, like I will be who I will be. I'm executing. I am doing what I need to be doing. I'm doing what I should be doing. So I definitely don't agree with this Bergman guy. What about you?
Yeah, that's the beauty of Torah, is that we can have different views on the same source and bring out different ideas.
Wait, is
What
that
I
a yes
like
or
about
no?
it is
Is it yes or no?
that maybe.
Okay. Well, what appeals to you?
Yes,
But
yes.
what resonates with you about it?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think what I like about it is that it suggests that God is not fixed and static and the same all the time. It suggests that God is fluid, that God changes, that God reacts and responds to the world, right? God, the fact that ehyeh means I will be means that God is not the same in the future as God is now. God is not going to be exactly the same. God will be something else, perhaps, than the way that God is now, yet to be perfected. Like God is also on this journey. God is also on this process of learning and growth and responding to the world in which we're all in,
So,
right?
I mean,
And
I
yeah,
agree that God, there is a, did you say a fluidity, a
a
changingness,
fluidity.
right?
Yeah,
I'm on board with that, right? Because
yeah,
at the same time, I guess really the question is, what does it even mean to be perfected? I think that's the better, like, right?
yeah. And does God need perfection? Isn't God already perfect? Like that's the part that I struggle with. Um, I wonder if the statement when it says God is the yet to be perfected I, well, what is that I? Is that the divine self? Is that referring to human beings and that God is sort of a more perfected, a perfect version of human beings who are totally imperfect, as we know? You know, is God the sum of all of the ideals towards which we strive? That's another way I think you could read this.
Hmm.
But we're getting very deep here. I wonder,
Yeah, who
I
knows?
wonder,
Who knows?
yeah,
But there is
yeah,
something, I think there is something to be said as far as it is not, God is not a rock. God is not a particular idol. That God is not necessarily something that can be confined into an idol, right? And I think that's one of the reasons that God sharply argues against literal physical idols in the Torah and argues here instead, I am who I will, like I will be who I will be. I'm more about existence than being a concrete object or even a god of a particular object like the Nile, right? Or the sun.
beautiful. Yeah, God is existence, and God is more than just. God cannot be confined to one aspect of nature or even one kind of personality. God is not just justice. God is not just mercy. God is the sum of all of these different attributes, but wherever God exists, God is always with us. God is always in relationship with us and in relationship with Moses and responding to where we are. And as the Rabbi Silver writes, God is there to help us, right? To live up to the promises that God promised us in our covenant and our brit, our covenant with God. And I think that sense of God's being representing the totality of all these different attributes is something really powerful to me because it means we can access God at different points and in different ways, no matter what we believe, whether we're Orthodox, Reformed, Conservative, right? We all have different entry points. We all have different ways by which we can pray and by which we can relate to God.
So, Rabbi Scheidel, thank you so much for this special guest presentation. This was great to
Uh-huh.
have you join us. And even though you are not able to be physically in the building at this time, I'm very happy to be able to have you share these words with the residents here at Cedar Village.
Yeah, and I want to thank you so much, Rabbi Kaplan, for hosting me and for providing this wonderful all the time at Cedar Village. You know, it's been such a pleasure to be with you and to be with all of you. And I look forward to seeing you in person soon.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Rabbi Scheidel.
Thank you.